All right, get
Uh,
shit doners. I've never started an episode with that, but it felt right today. I'm joined by a dear friend, past client, and fellow badass, Sarah Anne Thompson, who I don't know if I would word it this way. She's building an empire and she has been for a while, but she's also a mom now. And I feel like there's some shifts happening in her business that I'm witnessing from afar, witnessing from the gram. But I'm excited to have a conversation today about what it takes to build a business, but more importantly, how do you make pivots and steps in growth that align with you as a person as well? And I'm just so excited to have this conversation today. Sarah, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I love the shift that you've had in the podcast. And like, I feel like this is truly like the meat of the conversations you and I have always had is just
Yeah.
like, how do you get shit done? And I love it.
Yeah, feeling is very, very mutual. So, for those that don't know, could you give a little background story of what you're known for today? And then we'll talk more about kind of what's to come. So, let's start with that.
Yeah. So currently, right now, I am a Seattle wedding photographer. I actually just won Seattle Bride Magazine's Best Wedding
Right.
Photographer of 2023. So that's like, ugh, that's definitely like a mountain peak moment because I remember walking into that award show like 5 years ago when I was only 2 seasons in, and I was like, I'm gonna win that one day, and it's really cool. So I digress. But so I started my wedding photography business in 2017. I had technically been shooting on the side for a couple of years, but ultimately I had gotten fired from a corporate creative job and came home from my honeymoon to no job. And my husband was like, you know what? You've always done wedding photography on the side. Like, why don't you just go for it? And so I did. And so I've been full time since 2017 and I've shot like over 250 weddings. I've been traveling internationally for them. So it's kind of weird when I talk about it in this context. I'm like, holy shit, we actually did something. But like in my day to day, it just feels like, it's just something that I do. Like I don't take a lot of time to step back and look at it. And that's just kind of where I've been is just doing like the hard hustle in the summers and then having winters off. And it's been like really nice.
Yeah, totally. And I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, you've built a pretty successful photography business to the point where you could like continue what you're doing, not really reinvent and do anything different if you wanted to. And a pretty good career and balance. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would definitely say that like I've gotten to the point where I have a really great return clientele. I'm very much in good relations with my fellow vendor team. So I would say like the first 2 seasons were exceptionally like hustle based. So it was like screaming from the rooftops and telling everyone like I photograph weddings. You're getting married? Let me photograph you. And thankfully during that time I was in an age where like all of my friends and their friends, we were all kind of getting married around that time. So it really worked out kind of beautifully that like friends of friends of friends would just continue to refer me. And then as I made a name for myself in the industry, I've connected with a lot of like really great venues and a lot of really great planners to where I'm starting to get way more vendor referrals than anything else. Um, and I'm moving my business currently. So I would say that like in the beginning of anyone's photography career, you kind of shoot anything under the sun because you're just trying to get a portfolio, get work, get your name out. And so over the years, I've progressed my price point and my clientele to continue to move upwards. So now we're really targeting that luxury premier wedding market. And so my price point is at a range to where I really only have to shoot 15 weddings a year to go way beyond 6 figures. So it's like really nice to not have to shoot 50 weddings in a year to make the same living. I remember when I first started, I was charging $300 an hour. So you could get 8 hours with me for 2,400 bucks and you got like way too many images because I didn't know how to cull down. So you'd get like 2,000 images and it was just like wild. And now I'm a much more curated photographer and I would obviously say a much better one. So it's just been really fun to even look back as I go through like old hard drives to see how not only my work has evolved, but the business side behind it. And I think that that's where my passion for helping new business owners or people who are like 1 or 2 years in to really like, how can you make this sustainable and skip all the crap that I had to go through to get to the point where I'm at now.
For sure. And you kind of mentioned winning that award, which congrats, by the way. That's fresh and so exciting. But you mentioned that like almost like a summit of a mountain. And I think in general, your photography business, like you're just summiting that last peak at this point. Like you're hitting that luxury market. That's happening. That shift is happening. So how I guess what are you looking to next, and how did you decide that you wanted to expand your business beyond just photography?
Yeah, so I think it's really easy for a lot of photographers, like once you get to a certain point in your career, to really kind of you either become an educator or you completely pivot out of the business. I think wedding photography, honestly, for probably 90% of the vendors, it has a time limit. Just because you're working weekends, it's extensive hours and it's a really intense job because it's a market where you literally cannot mess up. Like if you miss the first kiss photo, like there's no going back and doing redo. So it's a very like pressure heavy job. And I think for a while I thought that I would always go into education around photography, which I have done, but then I started getting a lot more passionate as I became a connoisseur of podcasting back in 2012 and just continued to listen to them, that there were amazing conversations happening outside of my industry and just more in a generalized like life mindset balance. And I think becoming a mother has really just reinforced that. And so the idea came to me about having a podcast where we're having conversations that really mean something. Because I think there are some podcast episodes from like random different hosts or platforms that I'm listening to, and they're really kind of rocking me in a way that like is pushing me and challenging me to be a better version of myself, or to be a better mother, or to be a better business owner, and just thinking about things in a way you might not conventionally think of them. And so knowing that photography kind of had a time limit, I think I'll always be a photographer in some capacity, but knowing that eventually my daughter's going to grow up and she'll have dance recitals or basketball games or t-ball games on the weekends and I want to be there for it. It's how do I like continue my passion in a way that like fills my cup but also would make me money. Because let's just, I mean, babies are expensive, the world revolves around money, so I would love to say like altruistically that like I just want to like have a great impact, but I also need to pay my bills. So this podcast is really like a almost like a pathway to like whatever this next iteration will be. Because I really do love teaching, which I got to teach at a college this last year. I love teaching and I love having an impact. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be like, let me teach you how to use a shutter and an aperture in your camera, but it's like, let me impact your life so that that you're going to go off and be better for it. And so the podcast has really been that tiny gateway, which I think is going to lead me down that path.
That's so cool. And that's why we're having a conversation today. Because as Sarah and I were talking before we were recording, I think there's a lot of great support in how to start a business. Like Business 101, here's the nuts and bolts of how to get started. What people don't talk about is people who have built a successful business and they want more or different beyond that. And like, how do you build that ladder when you're already still on the existing ladder that you're on? And that's like the point that Sarah's at right now, which is I think just an important conversation to have. And I've made that what would I say? I wouldn't say a crisis, but I definitely had to like reinvent my brand and who I am and figure that out for myself. And I think for you too, like you're very much in that season, but a lot of the things you're taking action on, even the podcast. I mean, I've known Sarah for years, and this is not new news to me that she's sharing about this podcast more definitively now. So
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. So it's like that identity shift. So,
yeah.
to my current successful business, I'm known as Sarah Ann or Sarah Ann Photography. But I really wanted to come into my own identity as Sarah Anne Thompson and just be known by my name. You and I have talked extensively about my love for all things Jenna Kutcher because I just respect her so much as a powerhouse of a mama and a woman who literally, as she coins, has took a $300 camera and built a 7-figure empire. And I think what she's done that I really weaken is just done is better than perfect. And I think I've definitely suffered as an Enneagram 1 perfectionist my entire life. Hashtag going through therapy about it. It's great. But like, I think that like this season of motherhood, which we kind of touched on, is really forcing my hand into what are we doing next? And we just have to do it. Like there's, good thing we can curse on your podcast because like there's just no time to fuck around anymore. Like you either do it or you don't. And I think that you come to this like head where you're just like, you can't mess around.
Yeah. I want to know because the last time you and I had like a deep life check in was prior to Bebe being here. I want to know if things have shifted now that she is physically here for you, or if kind of your mindset and your future ideas were just solidified.
Yeah. And, I'll be so candid. Like
Yeah, you can share
I
it.
had an incredible pregnancy. I did have morning sickness, but who doesn't? But I loved second and third trimester. I was excited for my baby. I did all the preparation. I cleaned out my house. I did the nursery. I did all the DIY stuff. And then she was born and I got hit in the face with extreme postpartum depression. And my identity just felt like it had floated off into the ether. I'm like, how am I ever going to run a business? How am I going to keep this baby alive? How am I going to get anything done? And I just felt so trapped. And it was a really heavy feeling because I think something that I wasn't emotionally prepared for is the weight of the permanence that is being a mother. Like, no matter what happens, I will always be a mother. And like, even for parents who unfortunately lose their children, like, you're still a parent, you're still a mother, like that person was still there. And like, as a business, you get used to this rhythm of like being able to choose, like, what are you going to do? Do you want to do this? Do you want to try that? Maybe it didn't work out. Try, like, you can pivot all you want, but like motherhood is, you are on that track and you no longer get to get off. And so that was really intense. And, going from having complete freedom of my day to now revolving around this small creature that like I have to feed with my own body. And that was a really intense struggle. All of those things, like for a while, I was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. Like, I straight up don't know if I can do this. Since then, obviously things have gotten much better. I'm in therapy for postpartum depression and I'm on antidepressants, which have like revolutionized my body. Like, I feel so much more like myself. And I think that that is also, put a pin in it, but that's a whole other conversation that female entrepreneurs can have, is like the lack of support around postpartum depression. And it still feels like such a taboo topic, but literally it's just like the chemicals in your body are like, let's go for a ride, and not a safe one, and you just gonna have to go with it, and get the help that you need. So I would say, coming out of that fog, it's really been like, what do I want moving forward? Because I think the first and foremost thing that comes to mind every time I make a decision now is, what is this going to yield in terms of my relationship with my daughter? Like, how is this going to support me being a better mother, a better partner, a better self? And really thinking about how all of those things are like very much related and in tandem and in balance. And like, unless it's a hell yes, it's a hell no for me at this point. Like, I just don't have the bandwidth to be that yes girl anymore. And I think that's been the number one changer since I've felt like I can get back on this track.
Oh, whoa. Where do we go from there? First of all, I just want to say thank you for being that open with that, because I know for a fact you are not the only one who has felt those things. And again, that's why we're having the conversation today. And what's also interesting and unique to you, Sarah, is like, you built this whole entire empire prior to her being here. And so it's like, a lot of moms, their identity is mom, and then maybe they go off to build a business. But like, you had your own separate identity prior. And then now you have this new label, which is mom. And you also have this opportunity to still have a business on your terms. And so I think it's really cool for you to be so honest with yourself and your capacity. And I imagine you're saying no a lot more, probably. Is that fair?
I am. And, I would say one of the reasons why I think I had like such a visceral reaction to, I don't know how to be Sarah Ann the photographer and Sarah the mom, is because like, when my parents had my sister and I, their lives kind of stopped. Like, they just worked and they came home and took care of us. My parents didn't have like a big group of friends. Like, we were mostly just seeing family. And we didn't go on a single vacation as a family after I was 5 years old. My entire life, we never went on trips. We did like some fun like YMCA things with my dad, but that was about it. And so I never had it modeled for me. What does it look like to have a matriarch who still has her full identity while also being a mom? And that really shook me, because I was like, I don't know how to do this. I've never seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And, even my sister with her two kiddos, she struggles to have, I'm reading this book called Fair Play, and they call it like the unicorn space. It's like having that space of the things that still make you, you. Like, if someone was to talk about you at like a dinner party and be like, oh, like Kelsey is a business coach and she does all these fun things, most women lose that unicorn space because we dedicate ourselves so heavily to our children and to our household. So I think that coming into this season, like, working through it in therapy and thinking about it as like, it almost feels like carving this brand new path that I just haven't had modeled for me yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you're whacking the shrubs down, like you're totally creating your own brand new path.
Yeah. And
But
like,
also, it could go anywhere, which is also kind of cool.
I know you could just like machete your way through the jungle to a cliff. We don't know, but we're going to do it anyway and just, watch our footing.
Yeah, but you're carving the way for her, which is also amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really interesting because you're thinking, honestly, you still kind of get into the trope of thinking selfishly about how is this gonna, what is this gonna do for me or my family? And then you're like, oh my gosh, my daughter's gonna actually see me having done this. And so it's kind of like really cool because you're just like, yeah, I can't wait to tell her that, the year she was born, I achieved these things. And, then we were able to do all, like all the domino effects, right? That will fall into place. And so it's kind of weird to realize you're living your own history that you get to teach your kid about when they're older and they can understand.
Oh, for sure. I'm wondering, has your definition of success evolved too? Because I know type one, I mean, you guys, Sarah kicks butt, but she works very hard. She's a very hard worker, very hard on herself, very, yeah, I would say just tough and resilient. Do you feel like your idea of success and what that means moving forward, has that shifted?
I would say it's shifted in terms of like, I'm really taking a step back and not just like hunting down the next thing for the sake of hunting it down. I feel like for a
Mm-hmm.
while I didn't know how to sit still. So I was constantly looking for that next thing, which was creating the business course and then creating like three smaller courses and then creating downloadables and then going to the podcast and like and right now, knowing that like my business has set me up to where like this year, for instance, for 2023, if I didn't book a single other job the rest of the year, like I have enough income to not only cover the rest of the year, but 6 months into the following year.
That's
So it's
amazing.
kind of like being able to rest in the fact of like, I don't need to hustle. I can enjoy this season and enjoy the amount of work and be really strategic with what I want coming forward. Um, Ironically, so to be even more candid, in the wedding industry, we're seeing this really big slowdown in inquiries right now. And this is across the board nationwide, because it typically takes couples 1 to 3 years to date and decide to do the thing. And what happened 1 to 3 years ago? We had the pandemic, and the pandemic has created literally a like deficit of engaged couples. Like even engagement ring sales are down.
I didn't even think about
So
it. Makes sense, but yeah, I didn't even think about that.
yeah. And so it's pretty crazy that, they're predicting a slower year for 2024 and then maybe seeing a boom come back in 2025. And I think, honestly, if most vendors were to be real about it, if money wasn't an issue, everyone needs a break because 2021 through 2023 has been pretty much chaos. So slowing down would feel good, but obviously you become worried about income and about all that kind of stuff. So like, I don't even know where I was going with this point, but that's mom brain for you. But all this to say is that like, yes, so my perception has shifted in like mostly just thinking about what feels good now and what can I actually handle. One of the like epiphanies I had last week was I was sitting down with my VA and we're talking about like strategy and things that need to be done and things that I can hand off. And I found myself going into the same dumb trope that I was doing before of like, oh, I need to hit all these platforms. I need to post this many times a week. I need to do this thing. And ultimately, I was just looking at a task list and not doing what is the metric that's driving this? Like, why am I doing these things? Because if I don't know where I'm headed, then I'm just making stops along the way and I could be, going the complete wrong direction. And so I think having JoJo has really made me think of like, where's the end goal in each thing that I want to pursue? Because I have to have a true north. Otherwise, you get into that fucking around phase. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really easy as entrepreneurs, like the shiny object syndrome. That's what it feels like when you don't have a true north and you don't have that place that you're going and you know that you're going and you've thought about it because you're just like trying everything. You're just like, it's a mixed bag instead of having a recipe.
100%. Do you feel like that's different exploring this kind of coaching education space versus you as a photographer? Like it's easier to fall into distraction now than it was when you were building your photography business?
Yeah, because I think that going back to your point about what is it like to be on this ladder while you're trying to build this ladder, it's like it's almost like you forget how you did it. And you're just like, I gotta throw everything in the kitchen sink.
Yeah.
Um, so it yes, it does change. And you have to be strategic again. You have to think, okay, I spent 7 years getting to the place that I am now. And why did it take me 7 years? Is because I didn't really know what I was doing. And so now that I do know, applying that to the education phase of being like, okay, where do I want this to be? Like, what is the end goal? Like, what would a perfect day, if this role was truly set up, look like? Um, that gives you the direction of where you need to go.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Being in the hair world, it was pretty focused. It was bowling with the guardrails up. Like you just had to throw the ball down. So I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm just doing it in my own kind of way, and it wasn't anything earth-shatteringly different. Pivoting into coaching was like the wild wild west, where like if you wanted Google, I don't know how to get my brand out there on TikTok, there will be a lot of answers, and you can go down, like you were saying earlier, any of these paths, and all of a sudden you're like, I just wasted so much time meandering when I didn't need to. And it's just wide and open. So that's why I was curious what your experience was with that.
Yeah, and I think you illustrated it perfectly. It's bowling with the bumpers. It's like
Yeah.
when you just have this one goal, I think even if it is a little bit distracting, like you can still just get down to that one goal. It's when you open the second lane
Yeah.
that it feels like you no longer have the bumpers. And
Yeah.
it's because you're in a space with lingo and an industry and a network and a way of doing things that you're just not used to, because maybe it didn't apply to your original industry. So like getting into education, like it's all about continuing to find your own voice also in this second business. So like I think there are plenty of people out there who are having the conversation about like what to do when you start a business. How many times should you post to social media? How to use hashtags, like da 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 da. And like that's not the conversation I want to have with people. Like I want to teach people like how do you make something sustainable, and then how are you actually like being a good person while you're doing this. Like I think so one issue I see in my own industry is that a lot of people shoot weddings because they think it's just like this like money making machine, which it can be, it totally can be. But oftentimes I have people come to me and they're like, oh my gosh, my best friend had a horrible experience with her wedding photographer. She didn't even get this photo, she didn't get that photo, she never even gave her the photos. Like crazy stories from people who just don't respect the industry and understand the gravity of the work that we do. And like that's something that I want to talk about on my podcast, is like how are you being a good person no matter what you're doing? Like how are you, coming from a selfless place and not a selfish place, because that also adds to sustainability. I think when people go into business just for the money, those are the people that burn out in 1 to 2 years. But when you go in with a sense of purpose and direction, that's when you can really, be there for the long haul.
Absolutely. And the respect for yourself that, you're one person and you have to recharge your batteries and create boundaries, and your clients will respect you more because of those too. Yeah.
Yep.
I
Yep.
love that. So, that moment in photography when you were just starting to think of how do I Jenna Kutcherize my business, or, you're thinking life beyond Sarah the photographer, what advice would you have wanted to have heard at that moment? Like thinking of someone else who may be listening to this, who may be at that exact situation. They've built a successful thing and they're kind of thinking, what's next? What would you want to tell that person?
I would say like a couple things. So one thing is never compare someone's chapter 10 to your chapter 1. When I saw everything that Jenna had created, it is like I had blackout and forgot that she spent years building that. Like she started with a course that she sold to maybe 10 people. And then from there, she made like one downloadable thing. And then like each year she made one more thing, one more thing. And so I'm looking at Jenna being like, she has 6 courses, a podcast, she has affiliate links, she's doing all this stuff. And I think that's what really like slowed me down, was I was trying to do all of it at the same caliber and the same level as her. And that's just not how it's done. So if I could say anything, it's like baby steps still get you down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So like I wish I had just been like, okay, what's the first thing that I can do? What's the next thing I can do? And what's really funny is I know early on in our coaching conversations, we very quickly realized that like the course that I built was not the end of the road. Like that was just one step. And for me, that had been the end goal. So it was really fascinating. And I would encourage other people to like zoom out, look at the full picture, but then get really, really micro on like, what's the first step? Because I think we get overwhelmed with these huge goals and we never start because we're like, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I would say for my journey, I mean, I'm pretty transparent here that my first course was massive flop. Sorry to anyone following me circa beginning Kelsey business coaching days, but it takes a long time to build authority in the education space. And
Oh,
back to your point about comparing your chapter 1 to someone's 10, for me at least, I was comparing my hair salon chapter 10 to my business coaching chapter 1. So I was comparing to myself. But what I could not understand is even though I'd had a salon for 3 years prior to that, I was in industry and education for 3 years. But prior to that, I was doing hair in college. So I actually had a longer ramp up into the hair world and building authority as a hairstylist and salon owner than like I even acknowledged for myself. And it just takes the education space, in my opinion, just takes longer to build that authority. I don't know what your thoughts are though.
oh, I would definitely agree because like I had the same thing. Like I sold my course to one person,
Mm-hmm.
which was great. But like, and I like when that sale came in, like I freaking happy dance and like hip thrust the air, like it was incredible. But it does take a while for people to realize that you're shifting into this other thing. And I think one other thing, it was really fascinating. So I teach at the college that I actually went to for photography, and I'm talking to one of my students who wants to go into the wedding industry as well. And she hasn't even like built her website. Like she's like dreaming of what her website should be. And she's like, yeah, and I want to make a preset and sell that to photographers on my site. And I'm like, honey, the reason why people are successful with presets is because they've created a following
Mm-hmm.
that respect their edit style and it's become iconic. So then they can sell a preset. I'm like, I say this with all the love in my heart. No one knows who you are right now. No one's going to buy this because they don't know, like, and trust you yet. You have to build that factor. And so looking like taking a big old fat mirror and looking at myself and being like, people don't know, like, and trust you in that education space yet.
Yeah.
So again, you build this whole thing. So you're like Rome, build it and they will come. Not true. Not true whatsoever.
Yeah.
Not, you will be sitting with crickets if you do that.
Yeah.
So having to like, yes, I built the big thing. Okay, now let's backtrack and be like, how do we break it into smaller things so we can like actually lead people? It's like the cookie crumbs to the Hansel and Gretel like cottage. Like that's what we gotta go.
Yeah. Well, and what's cool about you is like the cottage still needs to be built. So it was not wasted time that you built it. Like it needed to be built. It's just a matter of now we need to have those little stepping stones that lead people there.
Yeah, and even knowing that, like, I think what's a big shift that's happening right now, especially around AI and everyone and their mother being in the education space, is I don't think that people are really willing to do the big ticket course buys anymore. Like I think that if you're super starting out, like maybe you're willing to invest that, but I think the biggest like feedback that I've gotten is just like that price point feels really high unless you're like a Jenna Kutcher, a Marie Forleo, a Tony Robbins, Dean Graziosi. Like people might not be willing to invest that high. So it's like, okay, well, how do we break this down to make it honestly where you can have like 100 sales at this smaller price point versus 10 sales at this higher price point?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I'm actually actively working on with my VA is like taking this huge, like almost 200-page workbook that I've made and breaking it down into smaller ebooks to sell. Because
Mm-hmm.
like I think that that is going to be a faster route to people being able to like digest smaller pieces of my education, and then that can lead to like greater things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see all that come into fruition. I want to end on one more question here, Sarah. How are you making decisions now? Because again, I've known her for years, people, and I feel like there's a sense of like, no, this is how we're doing it, and this confidence that you have in the route you're making and taking forward. So, how are you? What's your process behind making these decisions, and how are you executing on them?
So I think it comes with a balance of like, what is making me money right now? And how do we move the needle in the next thing? And so, like, for instance, like I have to edit my galleries and get those out to my clients. Like that is a have to non-negotiable. So we set aside time for that. Like we time block, and that's a big chunk of time that we use. And then when it comes to the other things, it's okay. are there any systems that I need to set up that I can set up right now that'll save me time? Or are there action steps that I can do? So honestly, that usually comes with a brain dump and then organizing it into like what actually matters and what doesn't. So for instance, like I just need to sit down and record the podcast. Like I don't need to think about like what is the artwork going to be and what's this other thing going to be. It's like, no, we need to record the thing, test it, proof of concept and get going. I don't need to research what's the best way to write show notes. Like what's the best way to like just fucking do the thing. So I think it's more of like anything that just gets the ball rolling is probably going to be my first like action item. And then the little cursory things that don't matter, it's really having to learn the done is better than perfect. And that's really hard because I still have a standard of like not perfection, but a standard of like operating or presentation that I want to maintain, because I think that's something that people have come to respect about me is that like I do take a lot of care and pride in what I put out in the world. Like I have friends who are way more booked than me, or their companies are doing way more weddings than me, but everyone comes back and they say that I feel more like a boutique experience, or I feel like a higher caliber of imagery, even though I might not feel that because I'm just comparing metrics with this person. Like people are still feeling that level of superior like presentation that I'm giving. And so when it comes to the to-do list, it's just like, what can we get done and what moves the needle? Like everything else just falls away.
That is such good advice. And I imagine that's tested even more so with your limited time and sleep currently. Like you
Yes.
have to operate that right. Like you literally have less hours.
You literally have less hours. And like one thing that's been really difficult for me is like I'm not a person, like I have mommy friends who are great at like, oh, I'll just get these few things done while the kid naps, or I'll do these things while they nap, or this thing while they play. And for me, like I know that I have to be fully engaged with what I'm doing to be able to make it work. So it's also been about separating these two categories of like what are like the like dumbed down tasks, or like the what's a good word for it, just like cursory things that you can do, and then like what are the big thought things that you have to have that set aside time for. So it's like if I'm doing content creation, like I have to have my brain fully locked in and need like 2 hours to think about that process from A to Z. But if I'm just like cleaning my office, organizing my camera gear, like that's something I can do without like even having my brain turned on. Like so it's separating those two things to then being able to execute with the time that you have. So you have to know your own brain. Like that's the thing, is you have to be very aware of your work patterns and your work processes so that you can optimize with the very little amount of time that you have. And let me just tell you, Kelsey, please, I don't know if you plan on having children, but if you do, enjoy your downtime now.
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah. As I've told you, I'm like, you're paving the way, and then I'll just default to you when I enter that chapter of life.
Oh man, and it's so funny because I look back at myself and I'm like, what were you doing with all that time? You could have built 5 empires.
Yeah. Hindsight's always 2020. That should be the caption of this episode today.
Oh yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
that being said, where can people follow you and watch your journey evolve? Because, like I said, there's a lot, knowing you, there's a lot behind the scenes that are probably happening. And I imagine a lot of big things will be announced and coming out in the future. So, where should people follow along?
Yeah, so I would say follow me over at my new platform, sarah.ann.thompson or sarahannethompson.com. So that's where the new blog and the podcast and everything is going to be. If you're curious about the photography, there'll be links there so you can check out that. But yeah, come find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable today and sharing such live wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And listeners, if you like this episode, please leave us a comment. That's always super helpful. And please definitely go follow Sarah and support her in all her future endeavors, especially when her podcast drops. Give that a like as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Kels.